Welcome to VLGA Connect. My name is Catherine Arndt and I'm the Chief of the VLGA Connect studio. I hope you enjoy today's Connect episode brought to you by the VLGA, the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Hello everyone and welcome to this week's edition of the VLGA Connect Governance Update, brought to you with thanks to our good friends, in fact our very good friends at Hunt & Hunt Lawyers and Tony Rowdy. Good to see you.
Thank you. Great to see you too, Steve. And I didn't have to travel far for this session, did I?
No, this is a special broadcast from the offices of Hunt & Hunt Lawyers because someone's missing.
There is our good friend Chris Eddy, I think, is missing from this podcast.
Well, he's over on a secret overseas sabbatical and we can't say where he is except...
Aloha.
I think we'll leave Chris right there.
Leave him in Hawaii with Elvis and the Blue Hawaii team, hey?
That's didn't you say that's the extent of your knowledge?
It is the absolute extent of my knowledge of Hawaii and Honolulu, etc.
Well, Chris may regard you. So let's move on, Tony.
I think we better.
How's in fact, let's go back 2 weeks and we can talk about what we've been doing, because I want to talk firstly about my week, and that was the fact that Sarah Ray from Justicia Lawyers and I did a session at Essendon Rangers Council, and you and I, that was about better disagreements, better teams, and good conflict. And you and I did a session at Essendon Rangers Council a week before on governance.
Really turned on the Macedon Rangers weather for us, I think, on the day. But it was a lovely session I was involved in at Gisborne with Bernie O'Sullivan and the councillor team. It was really positive.
Well, I would say to you, Tony, the warm reception and the really hospitable environment with the councillor and the executive group was sort of contrary to the weather we'd expect. Now, you want to talk about sport, though, and you want to talk about my football team.
I do. I do know that you barracked for that club, Essendon, which has been in the news a little this week, Steve. Not sure for the best of reasons, but how do you feel about it as an Essendon supporter?
I think the Bombers are the good governance gift that keeps giving, Tony.
Right.
Yeah, and where do you want to start?
Well, of course, we're talking about the short-lived appointment of their latest CEO, Mr. Thorburn, Andrew Thorburn, which I think lasted for was it 24 hours?
It was about 24 hours, Tony, and there are a few lessons in that appointment and the unappointment, not only in terms of CEOs, but more generally in relation to good governance. Where would you like to start?
Well, I think that the process for the appointment of Mr. Thorburn probably raises a few issues that are relevant to councils and local governments, public service generally as well, I think. I did hear that Mr. Thorburn had some involvement in the initial process for appointment.
Well, the story was that he'd been on the selection committee, and then at some point after that process commenced, it was identified that he may well be an effective candidate, so he withdrew from the selection committee and became the candidate.
Look, I don't think it's a good look. I think the idea of a candidate being involved in the formulation of potentially the questions, the formulation of the process, maybe even the selection criteria and the weighting criteria would be problematic from my perspective in terms of conflicts of interest. I know that we're often involved in training and updates for local governments in relation to how they handle conflicts of interest, and one of the concerns would be for an individual to have been involved in, say, preparing the tender specifications or the reasons for council to maybe need this particular procurement, and then saying, hey, now I'm going to participate as a potential contractor or a candidate for that procurement process, that to me would say, hey, would suggest that they've got an inside running, they've got some inside knowledge of the process. That I think, from a reasonable person's perspective, we'd say that they might have an advantage potentially over other candidates for the appointment. And one wonders just what might have happened here at Essendon to end up in this situation.
You know, this conversation's painting me, Tony, but I agree completely. For me, it just begged belief that the people on the CEO selection panel hadn't signed their rights away, if you like, to be involved as candidates, in the same way that I know, and I presume you've prepared contracts when a council is doing a piece of work regarding the specification or the evaluation of a need for a service, that the successful or that the tenderers are required to sign away their right to participate in the next tender.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think it's from that position that we take, that no particular candidate who should have inside knowledge, a starting advantage over other candidates because of some participation in the process, in the lead up. And that's something I think most council procurement teams are familiar with.
Yeah.
We often have to be careful engaging consultants who might, be engaged by council to identify if there's a need for a particular procurement. And sometimes those consultants can then potentially want to participate in the procurement. And I think, again, as you say, it's part of the engagement process to say, look, if you're going to participate in this formulative phase of the procurement, then you need to sign your right away to be a candidate.
Yeah, and now the next part, we don't need to dwell on it for too long, Tony, because I presume at no point in any interview would you ask a candidate what their religion is.
No.
But you might have a conversation about whether, in the way that they operate, or in doing your due diligence, satisfy yourself that your candidate would, I guess, be able to meet the values and behaviours expected of the club.
Absolutely. I think most organisations, particularly organisations with a real public face to them, like a football club, like a council potentially, would want to ask a candidate for a senior role, do they share some of those core values? Is there any concern that they might have in being able to support some of those values? And don't know if that happened.
Well, no, and it's unusual because normally you would look at the values and behaviours of the candidate to make sure that they're an appropriate match, and then start looking at the skills. And it seems really odd that after only 24 hours, it was decided that Mr. Thorburn didn't share the values, which perhaps should have been asked earlier. Can I just say in passing, Tony, that Jared McLaughlin from Davidson's made a really pertinent post to all of this on his LinkedIn, and there was some really good commentary. I liked it because I agreed with most of it. Coming back, that's really worth a read there, including something from Mark
Good stuff. Well done.
Yeah. And just one other thing, because this conversation's paining me. The commentary by board member Kevin Sheedy in the previous week.
Yeah, I did. So this is one of those scenarios where, when a board or even a group of councillors, make a decision, and for someone to then come out subsequently and saying, well, I didn't share that view, I wasn't part of that decision, and actually nominate that they were, a dissenting voice is a bit unusual in this sort of appointment.
And just to go back a step, so this is that Kevin Sheedy, when the club had said in a public statement that the appointment of Brad Scott as coach had been fully endorsed, Kevin Sheedy then said, well, it wasn't because I supported James Hird. And normally you would think that would almost be a career killer on that particular board for a board member to be so outspoken about a decision that they didn't agree with, particularly where a club is, purporting to look for unity.
Yeah. Look, I would have thought that, as I said, one of the values of that board would be that we do, once we do make a decision, then we don't go out publicly and are critical of the board decision. That's certainly a typical position with most public companies, private companies even, and certainly representative organisations like council. So not sure what Sheeds was thinking there.
No, I think he wasn't having his best day, but it's a gift again to the governance update, because I'm sure it won't happen very often, but if there are any examples in future of councillors, presumably interstate councillors, being critical of a council decision, we will now call that a sheedy.
You had to wangle Essendon in.
Oh no, yeah, I'm looking forward to doing it for better reasons. Now, in terms of your week, Tony, you've been out to Wyndham.
Yes, well, actually did an online session this morning with Wyndham staff on. It's a regular one I do, normally monthly. Martina Simpkin in the governance team organises it, and it's on conflicts of interest. So we do a regular catch up with new staff and a reminder for staff who haven't done it for a couple of years on the conflict of interest provisions, which of course have changed somewhat since under the 2020 Act to the 89 Act. A really good session, lots of good questions, and quite engaging bunch of people from a variety of positions on council.
And you had an interesting stat about the place of residence of Wyndham staff.
It's really interesting. Wyndham, and if anyone from Wyndham's listening, I'm sure you're aware of this, Wyndham's one of those councils where a very large proportion of the council staff actually reside within the municipality of Wyndham, which is a great thing, returning money into the community in terms of salary and the knowledge of the community those staff have. Where it becomes relevant in a conflict of interest sense, of course, is that if you live in an area, if you participate in an area with your spouse and maybe your children and your family, you'll have all those connections. The likelihood of potentially having conflicts of interest can grow. So an example might be where you're involved in the children's netball team. You might become the president or the secretary. That might become a relevant conflict of interest in your dealings with the netball club on council. So we had a really good discussion about that. And it's not just relevant in Wyndham, of course, in a lot of the rural and regional councils, it's even more likely to occur.
Yeah, if we don't talk about it, then it becomes a higher risk. Now, you were also interested this week in the appointment of Australia's newest High Court judge.
Yeah, absolutely. Congratulations and well done to Justice Jago. So Jane Jago, formerly a Federal Court judge, formerly New South Wales Land and Environment Court judge, has been appointed to the High Court. But what perhaps is even momentous about that is that this is the first time in the history of the High Court that we see a majority of females sitting on that bench. So the High Court was established in 1903. It was solely consisted of male judges right through until 1987, when Mary Gaudron was the first female appointment to the board. And now here we are in 2022 with a majority of females making up the bench. I just think it's a really momentous point in time for the High Court.
Now, there's two things that came out of that, Tony, that in our little chat we had before that you wanted to mention. And one was the, which we probably don't need to dig in, but the bipartisan support for Her Honour. Is it High Court Judge Her Honour?
Yes, she is Her Honour.
Her Honour Justice Jago, the bipartisan support for that appointment. But the other thing is, and you could have knocked me down with a feather, you wanted to quote Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
I did. So, of course, virtually everyone out there will know who Ruth Bader Ginsburg is, but really eminent jurist on the long-term appointee to the Supreme Court of the United States. Of course, when she was appointed as the first woman appointed to that court, she was often asked the question, well, how many women should there be on the Supreme Court? When will it be enough? And Ruth Bader Ginsburg's response was, well, of course, when there are all females on the US Supreme Court. And often people in the media and commentators would say, well, that's a bit strange. Why should we have an all-female Supreme Court? Which is, of course, where Ruth was driving here, because she would say, well, we've had an all-male Supreme Court for about 100 years,
and no one batted an eyelid.
No one batted an eyelid. So why would you bat an eyelid if we had an all-female Supreme Court, or indeed High Court in Australia? So it's about, of course, the appointing the most qualified, the right person, and as you say, Jane Jago is universally lauded as someone. I believe that the previous Attorney General, Christian Porter, had her on his short list of potential appointments, and great to see her join that bench.
Right. Now, could not agree more. A couple of legal matters we'll go to. We're going to jump around a little bit here. So really quickly, Tony, we've heard from our very good source at the Yarra City Council that police charges against Councillor Anab Mohammed have been dropped. No case to answer, therefore.
Yeah, look, I think this is a case where the right process has been followed. We're all equal before the law and considered innocent until proven guilty in a country like Australia. And it's just, I think it's a reminder for all of us not to, jump into the conversation early and suggest that people should step down or are unfit for office when the process hasn't been followed.
Its course. Yeah. And the only person, I suppose, in a sense of accountability, who might make that call is the inspectorate, local government inspector under the Local Government Act, and they will go through their steps, and we've talked about that. Speaking of then matters legal, there was an announcement this week, or a decision this week, in regard to a defamation matter involving Councillor Cam Howe at Kingston Council and an organisation called Cavendish
Properties. Yeah. So this was it's a county court proceeding that was so proceedings brought against Councillor Cameron Howe in the tort of defamation, and then there was a counter claim by Councillor Howe against some people at Cavendish Properties. What this related to was a Facebook page that Councillor Howe hosted.
Actually, Tony, can we get, if anyone doesn't know about this, we better grab their attention. Yeah. The quantum of the award against Councillor Howe?
$205,000.
Right.
So quite a large award. There was a smaller award in Councillor Howe's favour, I think $15,000, but certainly a really substantial award. And to be fair, the matter's still the subject of consideration by the parties. I believe Councillor Howe's considering whether there are opportunities for appeal. But yeah, really enormous personal implications when there's such a high award.
And now I cut you off, but you were starting to talk about the implications for people that are potentially hosting or administrators of social media pages, and what, even no matter where this goes, what some of those lessons might be.
Yeah. So this was a Facebook page hosted by Councillor Howe called the Carrum and Paterson Lakes Forum. And so the comments in question weren't comments made by Councillor Howe, they were comments made by third parties on the Facebook page that were found to be defamatory of Cavendish or individuals at that organisation.
If we can be frank, Tony, the comments were suggesting corrupt conduct.
Certainly that's what the court found, that they were suggestive of that, and that's certainly why one of the reasons why the plaintiff said they brought the action. But I think the implications more broadly in local government are really for individual councillors and also councils themselves in terms of hosting social media pages. What is their liability in relation to third-party comments? What level of monitoring ought they have? Is that real-time monitoring? Because if someone makes a potentially defamatory comment and it sits there for 24 hours before council realise, or it's done on a weekend and the officer comes in on the Monday.
And presumably, what's the briefing given? At what level of expertise is the officer? Are they aware of the potential risk? what writing instructions are giving to the officer about deleting or blocking particular comments, because that can get a bit of aggravation and sort of needs to be well supported by the organisation, presumably.
Yeah. So again, look, this is a matter that is, still potentially subject to appeal, but I would say, serious implications. Far be it for me to, question the decision of the county court, but I certainly feel for the councillor in question who, again, they weren't that councillor's comments, they were third parties' comments. And I am aware that the Commonwealth Government and states and territory governments are or have recently been considering, ought there be a defence for hosts of social media pages where it's an innocent dissemination type defence, potentially where the administrator ought to have an easily accessible complaints procedure, and there should be a process where someone who's aggrieved complains, and then you can remove the item, and that if you follow that process and it's a defensible process, then you are protected from this tort of defamation.
Yeah, and look, a couple of things on that. This occurred, as I understand, Tony, before Councillor Howell was in fact elected to council.
Correct. Yeah. 2019. That's right.
Yeah. So of course, Tony, it begs another question of how should we treat any sort of allegation of corrupt conduct?
Yeah. Well, I think that people have to be very careful in making allegations of corrupt conduct that they're not the judge and jury. We have a process in Australia, and if you go out in some public forum, on social media or some other forum, and make that allegation, be prepared potentially for consequences in defamation if ultimately there's no court proceeding that says there was corrupt conduct.
And isn't the other thing that if there is an investigation on foot, it's not helped by public commentary?
No, absolutely. Just muddies the waters and makes it worse.
Yeah. Now, one last one, and I know people that were listening last week are really waiting for this, and this is the Dorset Council in Tasmania and the waste charge in relation to Air BNBs, which I think proposed an increase from about $900 to about $3,000.
Yeah, $3,020. So I've done a bit of research on this one, Steve. Once I worked out that we weren't talking about Bournemouth in England and it wasn't that Dorset,
Good job.
I found the right council in Tassie, and yes, the proposition there is that Dorset Shire Council has increased their annual waste charges by over 200% for short stay accommodation. According to the ABC reports, there is a legal challenge on to this, and that'll be interesting to see. The Mayor has come out in the media and essentially blamed the Tasmanian Office of the Valuer General because the Office of the Valuer General there is refusing to classify short stay accommodation as commercial and insisting that it would be classified as residential. It's understandable that there's some real difficulties here. We have these difficulties in Victoria with short stay accommodation. In our various planning schemes, there's different treatments of short stay accommodation. Typically, if it's an occupier who's offering short stay accommodation for other people to come into their home, that wouldn't need a planning permit in a residential zone.
It would just be residential. And my understanding is over a long period of time, the Planning and Environment Act, or the interpretation has been that from time to time, owners of houses will either let out their properties or invite guests in for a fee.
And of course, just having a purely an investment property that is rented out for 12 months or more, there might be tax consequences, but there aren't typically rating consequences. So, and I think part of the problem here is that it's very difficult for councils to know that there is short stay accommodation taking place.
Well, doesn't it sort of go back to the purpose and the fairness of the proposal by the council? I'm presuming, Tony, that they've got extensive information about how much more waste is generated by these properties.
That's interesting. I think that might well get a run in the court. This issue is, is it fair that that short stay accommodations pay more for waste charges? Is there typically more waste? Now, I guess if my 21-year-old daughter and all her friends booked somewhere for Air BNB, there might be a few extra bottles in the recycling that week. But I don't know if it was you and your lovely wife, Steve.
Folks like us, Tony, no.
Maybe a bottle of red.
So if we're skipping around that issue, getting a rezone, or getting a different classification under the Valuation of Land Act could be problematic. You're saying. I'm sort of hearing you say there's been a lot of reports in the ABC regarding this matter, but as yet there's been nothing at court, and we're probably waiting on someone to launch a challenge and see where that goes.
Absolutely. And I think this will be watched closely by the sector across the country, frankly, because there clearly is some angst in the community about the amenity impact of short stay accommodation, but whether it'll remain to be seen whether this particular additional levy of waste charges is going to prove effective out of Dorset.
Yeah. So we're watching this space, and our listener will hold us to account for that.
They will.
Okay, Tony, we have probably done our romp around the governance landscape for this week.
I reckon we have.
What's on for next week?
It's another busy week, actually, Steve. So we do have the LG Pro social media conference, and I'm delighted. So I'm going to share a platform with Councillor Amy Johnson, the Deputy Mayor of the City of Ballarat. She and I are presenting a session on the implications and the risks of social media on Thursday next week. So that ought to be fun.
That'll be good. I'm just wondering if Ballarat's some sort of epicentre, but I'm surely not, knowing your background. Now, what I can say, Tony, is that, get along. Anyone in LG Pro, get along to that. That sounds really interesting. As far as the VLGA is concerned, and I touched on this previously, the session that we've got coming up on the role of Mayor What's to Know on the 28th of October, put that in your diaries. We have locked in Ian McCormick, our good friend from Alberta, Canada, who's written the book.
Yes.
And Leanna Thompson, who is not only a experienced CEO, but also a former mayor, to talk on the topic, and we think we'll have one more person that we're just finalising at the moment, Tony. So 28th.
Watch that date, yeah.
So, Tony, that brings us to a close. Thanks for the opportunity to actually have you as a guest as well as a sponsor.
I hope we haven't ruined it for Chris when he gets back, and it's cause no damage is the first thing to do, and sorry, Chris, if I have.
Oh, no, well, I can just imagine Chris saying, well, here's another fine mess you've gotten us into. I'll clean this up. To everyone, thanks for watching. It is on my script. Thanks again to our sponsors at Hunt & Hunt Lawyers, and also for their hospitality, and hopefully we'll see you again next week. Cheers.
Bye, everyone.